Hey there, my name is Christy Rotman and I am the College Life Skills Coach here at UVA. I'm excited to be with you today. In my role as College Life Skills Coach, I meet with students one-on-one, currently through phone and Zoom. And then I usually put on a series of workshops similar to what I'll do today, although most of those workshops are on hold currently because I know we are all Zoomed out. Here is a sample of topics that my meetings with students cover. So as you can see, it's really wide ranging, anything related to your academics. I'm happy to be a support for you and also happy to be a person that if you're looking for something or just need help in a particular way, you can always come to me and we can strategize who or where the best resource at UVA would be. All right, so I want to invite you just to think for a moment about what led you to watch this workshop, what you're hoping to hear or learn or take away. This is a great learning strategy. It helps spark your brain to look for meaning and engage with the material. So it's helpful to kind of think about, gosh, what do I already know about time management? And what do I want to learn? What do I want to take away? So I'll give you a moment to think about that. All right, so as we think about time, right, we all get the same amount of time, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, 52 weeks in a year, but we don't always experience time the same way. So usually when I'm doing an in-person workshop, I have students stand up, and then when I set a timer and when they feel like 30 seconds has passed, I have them sit down and we kind of compare what it felt like for each person and kind of what the range of times that students thought 30 seconds was. So kind of interesting. But again, it just is a way to illustrate that time feels different from day to day and from person to person. One of the best places to start when you think about time management is having an accurate picture of how you're spending your time. So nobody can create more time, but we can find better ways to spend our time, which allows us to accomplish more important tasks and spend time with the people that are important to us. So one way to do this is to do a time log. So for 2 or 3 days, you can jot down kind of everything that you did and some timestamps that are associated with it. Even better if you compare your log with what your plan was, because then you can see where they do and don't match. If you're going to do this, I recommend doing kind of a balance of a weekday and a weekend. That way you can kind of see what the differences are. And then you can have a record of 2 to 3 days that you can start to analyze and think about what the patterns are. Is your plan matching up to what you do, or is there a big disconnect there? Things like that. All right. The other thing that I always say when we talk about time management, right, is that it's not just time that we're managing, it's life management, right? So when you're thinking about managing time, you want to think about your whole life. You want to think holistically. And that means that you're not just a student, right? You have lives to live, and actually you're going to be managing that life for the rest of your life. So let's do a little exercise. Think for a moment about what hats or roles you have in your life right now. An example might be that you're a student, that you're a friend, a daughter or son, a researcher, an employee, a volunteer, a president of a club, things like that. So think for a moment of what roles you're currently playing. And then I'll invite you to take a moment to draw your roles in a mind map form. And I'm going to show you mine for inspiration. Feel free to pause this video if you need to grab some paper to do this. But here's my map, and I used an online tool, so forgive me that it's a little bit clunky. But these are some of my roles and hats that I play, right? I'm a friend, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm an employee, and I'm a mother. And then next, I would invite you from each of those roles to consider the responsibilities that would be associated with those roles. So, as an employee, I'm kind of bound to work this 40-hour work week, 9 to 5. As a mom, I'm kind of on all day, every day. And so you might think about what are the roles and responsibilities that each of the responsibilities that each of these roles require. And then I would invite you to think about which roles demand the most time for you. So for me, being an employee and a mom demand a ton of time. For you, I'm guessing it would be a student and then maybe some of your other roles as well. So you could circle those. Then as you think about managing your time, right, you want to ensure that you're planning for each of these roles because that's part of your life that you're managing. All right, next you can think about what tasks demand your time. So tasks that go along with those roles might be for a student, you're likely to be doing homework or attending class. But what are some of the tasks that come along with being a son or a daughter or a friend or a leader of a club or something like that? What are those tasks that take up your time? And you can add those to your mind map. And then lastly, what needs are there that influence your time? Maybe these aren't associated with a role, but are still part of how you spend your time. So that could mean things like sleeping, eating, exercising, and you can add those to your mind map too. I like to do this mind map exercise to affirm that you're a whole person, right? You have complex roles and responsibilities, and your time management plan and skills should really encompass all of the life that you've drawn, right? It's all really important. And there may be times and seasons where you kind of lean into one area of that more than another, but we don't want to forget about that as you think about managing your time. All right. Some questions that I find helpful to ask as you're reflecting on life management or time management is how are you going to manage all of these things? What will that look like? Will that mean pulling back from some things? Will that mean making boundaries on your time? What does that look like to balance all of those things? And when is it okay not to manage all of those things? What does that look like? How do you decide where to spend your time? And what happens when we take on too much? I think these kinds of questions can help us reflect. All right, so there are a ton of approaches to managing time. We're going to come at this from a few angles so you can take what's helpful and run with that. Another way to think about time is to think about the big picture. So I would invite you to imagine with me that you've finished your time at UVA, you loved your time at UVA, and you land your dream job, and your life continues. And it's now 10 years from now, and you're reminiscing with your best friend about your college days. What memories do you imagine will stand out to you? What things did you give your time to? What things were you proud of? What things did you learn? And what regrets might you have based on how you're spending your time here at UVA? So again, I'd invite you to pause and kind of think about that. In a workshop, I would have you talk about that with a friend or a partner next to you. But doing this helps us zoom out and think bigger picture. And when we do that, sometimes it can help guide the smaller choices or the day-to-day choices because we're grounded in that bigger picture. So we can use time in ways that match our values, our goals, our hopes, and our purpose, or not, right? So sometimes remembering these things can help us make different choices about our time. So here's another exercise. Take 1 minute to brainstorm as many goals as you can. And again, feel free to pause and get out a timer. You can choose whether these goals are for the semester or for the school year or just for your time at UVA. But I don't want you to worry about evaluating the goals. I just want you to brainstorm as many as you can in this minute. Okay, so after the minute is done, scan your list and circle the 1 or 2 that are standing out to you as kind of the most relevant or the best goals. All right, and put that aside. And then I want you in a separate place to jot down what things took the most time in your week this week. Where did most of your hours go? If you were to do a time log, as we talked about, what would kind of rank the highest as far as where you spent your time? And you can think about that. All right, and so now you can take both of those lists out, the goals that you came up with and then the where you spent your time, and you can compare those, right? Do they seem to overlap? If so, how does that make you feel? And if not, then why don't they overlap, and how does that feel that they don't? Again, so kind of paying attention to our values, our goals, our hopes, our purposes, that's one way to come at managing time. So there we go. All right, another way is to prioritize, right? So there's a tool developed by President Dwight D. Eisenhower as he was making demanding and tough decisions in his various leadership roles. He was using urgency and importance as a way to prioritize. And so he made this little matrix that sometimes can be helpful. So on the top here in quadrant 1, that's things that are urgent and important. So these things can be the most pressing, right? They're time sensitive, they need to be completed immediately. Oftentimes they feel like a crisis or like I have no choice but to do this. Then quadrant 2 would be things that aren't urgent, but they are important, right? So relationships can kind of fall in this category, maybe a new opportunity that's further down the road or planning to meet a long-term goal, something like that. Quadrant 3 down here would be urgent but not important. So these are the things that kind of demand our time, but maybe ultimately don't have a lot of importance. So like a random phone call or meeting, interruptions, things like that. And then the last category is not urgent and not important. So this would be things like that you might normally think of as kind of eating up your time, like social media or watching Netflix or things like that. I don't want to make this all negative because I think sometimes watching a movie is a great thing. But if we're thinking about kind of prioritizing things, that may not always rise to the top, right? So as you kind of look at this matrix, what's an example of an activity for quadrant 2 that matters to you, but maybe doesn't make your to-do list very often? And what's one thing that you could do today or tomorrow to prioritize that? So I'll give you an example, and this may not exactly be quadrant 2, but when I was teaching this workshop a year or so ago, I realized that I really like reading, but I rarely was making time for it because I would get stuck doing these other things, or I'd get stuck watching TV that I didn't even really care about, instead of kind of setting aside that time for reading. And so that helped me kind of recognize and reflect on that and then start to make some different choices. And so I got back into the habit of reading again for fun. All right, so then what's a quadrant 4 activity that's getting more time than it needs for you? And so in my example, right, that was watching TV that just didn't really matter to me. All right, so that's how you could start to use that. You might even put your to-do list kind of in different categories. Maybe you would find that helpful. All right. I think this is a really interesting visual. It's a short little video clip about putting first things first. So it has 3 different size rocks that they're going to put in this jar. And if you put the small rocks and then the medium rocks and the big rocks in that order, all the rocks don't fit, right? And so what they're saying is put the big things in first, and then the medium ones can fill around that, and then the small ones fill in all the holes around that. The principle behind it, right, is to prioritize what is most important, right? To put first things first. So that might be kind of at the beginning of the day or on your to-do list to make room for that. And then the little things that are less important will either not get done and it won't matter so much, or they'll just fill in the extra space that way. Okay, so another way to think about time management is to get organized. And this is often how time management workshops are approached. And it's definitely a helpful strategy too. I think it helps when students feel organized on 3 levels, kind of that big picture monthly semester level, a week to week level, and then a day-to-day level. So for that semester view, I usually hand out this paper version of the semester calendar. Some students use Google, but you want to ask yourself, okay, what is everything that needs to get done and by when? So you might go through all your syllabus and put all your major assignments like papers, projects, exams, those kinds of things, and add that to your calendar, right? So you can see, for instance, from the beginning of the semester, what your life is going to look like for that semester as far as assignments go. You might also add, if you have a major trip happening or a competition of some sort, something big like that, you might add in as well. On the weekly level, you could take this a step further and say, when am I actually going to do that work? And so you could map out your time, taking this template on the left. You could fill in kind of what are all your commitments, and then what are the spaces around those commitments that you have to work with in order to get the work done, right? I would encourage you, as you think about your weekly plan, to remember that for every hour that you spend in class, the university expects that you spend approximately 2 to 3 hours outside of class working on work and studying. I don't think this is going to be exact, but it's a helpful thing to remember, right? If you're taking 15 units, the university expects that you're going to spend 30 to 45 hours outside of your class time working on class related work, right? Being in study groups, quizzing yourself, doing practice problems, writing papers, studying for the exam, those kinds of things. And so you want your schedule to reflect that. A lot of students find it really helpful to have a day where they kind of think about and plan for their week. Oftentimes students will use Sundays to do this, and that tends to help them feel like they're on top of things, that they're not being caught off guard that way. All right, so here's a sample of what this could look like on the day-to-day. This one on the left is organized by week, but it breaks it out day by day, which I like. I also like that it has 2 columns. One is a must complete column and one's a wish list column, right? Because oftentimes when we make to-do lists, we're completely unrealistic about what we're expecting ourselves to do. And so when we can get more realistic, it helps create a cycle of success instead of a cycle of discouragement. The other template here is just something I found online as an example of what it could look like. If you need more resources for staying organized, feel free to check out my website. I've got some things there for you. Or I'll have my email at the end. You're also welcome to reach out and we can strategize together. Another strategy for managing time is to create boundaries. And so the principle here is that work expands, right? It's going to take as much time as you give it. And so if we don't give it a boundary, that's the kind of situation where we think, oh, this paper is going to take me an hour and it ends up taking me all day, right? And it probably didn't need to. So this is where studying in chunks, or this Pomodoro technique where you set a timer for a certain amount of time and then you take a little break, that can help make a boundary that way. It's also a great strategy if you find yourself procrastinating. It's a lot easier to kind of motivate yourself to say, okay, I can do this for 20 minutes and then I get to move on, as opposed to like, I just have to sit down and do this endless thing that I don't want to do. We also tend to underestimate how long things are going to take us. So I recommend planning a cushion as you're thinking about your time. And then I encourage you as much as possible. This is like the template in that last slide where we had the wish list column, but you want to be as realistic as you can, right? You're not going to study and stay focused well for 8 hours straight with no breaks and no food and it's just not going to happen. And in fact, it's a lot better with how your brain works to plan shorter, more frequent study sessions over time instead of cramming, right? Our brain does not learn from cramming. And so you may be able to kind of regurgitate that the next day for an exam, but it's not going to stick in your long-term memory. All right, here's a way to structure your study time. It's a template that I have that I think is really great. It helps you be really focused and intentional about how you're spending your time. So at the beginning of your time, let's say you had an hour, you would set a goal. What specifically are you trying to accomplish? This helps you focus and dive in, and it helps you to resist procrastination. Then you want to spend the bulk of your time being as active as possible with what you're trying to do, right? So rereading a book and highlighting, not a very active task, but quizzing yourself, making flashcards, explaining concepts back and forth to a friend, drawing pictures. Those are the types of active things that are really going to help your brain recall and practice making the information kind of your own. Then give yourself a break. Look away from the computer screen, especially right now while we're living on Zoom. Go for a little walk, get your blood moving. You're going to let that learning sink in. And then when you come back, do a little mini quiz and see what's stuck, right? Don't peek at the answers, but kind of check in, like, where am I at? What really stuck from that study session? And then you can wrap up your time and think about where you would start again for your next hour that you are studying. All right, the last, or I don't know if this is the last one, but another strategy for managing time is to break it down. So this is also a great strategy for procrastination. Here's an example of what this could look like, right? If you have the large task of a test, here are some mini tasks that you could do as you get ready. And in this example, right, they're starting to do the studying and the preparation 2 weeks out. Which is great, right? They're starting in advance. They're doing it in small chunks over time. By the time they get to the test, they're going to feel prepared and not have crammed, not have felt stressed out in that way. So I highly recommend doing this for all of your big things and kind of plotting it out that way. I have a template that can help you do this as well. So feel free to reach out if you want a little handout to walk you through that. Oh, here's an example of someone who did this for like a finals month, I think. And you can see how they color coded and they spaced things out. So they were starting things early and kind of making progress, but never doing too much at once. So that's a really great example. All right, my last tip is to start now, which really means to fight procrastination. Fight the urge to think in all or nothing terms and practice doing even the littlest things right now. So you can ask yourself, what's the smallest step that I could do? What's too easy not to do? Too easy to fail, so to speak. And then as a metaphor, I would encourage you to resist the urge to dwell on what did or didn't happen and envision yourself each moment or each day at a starting line, right? It doesn't matter what happened before. When the whistle blows, it matters what you do to start. So as you try to study and as you try to make progress on your work, think about, okay, what's the smallest thing that I could do to get myself over this starting line? I like that because it kind of empowers you. It gives you agency back. It doesn't spend all your energy beating yourself up for what you have or haven't done. And I can literally think of myself as like falling over that starting line. So what's something I could do that would take me 2 minutes, and it would be the equivalent of falling over that starting line just to make a little more progress. All right. Oh, using small chunks of time is another great strategy. I found this at one point. Someone had kind of listed tasks that you could do in these really small chunks of time. I think this is awesome because oftentimes we convince ourselves we can't work until we have large blocks of time, and we rarely have that luxury. And it doesn't work well with how our brain learns either, right? It actually learns better if we can do small chunks spread out over time. And you can make a surprising amount of progress if you can focus for 30 minutes, for instance, and then kind of come back to that later. All right. Another strategy for starting now is to consider whether you usually start with the easy thing and then move to the hard things, or if you just start with the hard thing and then move to the easy things. There's pros and cons to both, but if you find yourself doing one, try the other and see if that helps you get started. All right, so now I'd invite you to think of something that's stuck from everything that we've covered today. and one action item that you're taking away from here. And again, you can pause the slides if you need to. Research suggests that if you don't try something within the next 48 hours, you probably never will, right? It'll kind of be in one ear and out the other. All right, I'm going to skip ahead here to the reminder that change is a process. It's not an event, right? So change is going to take time, and it's most successful when we do it in small ways over time. So New Year's resolution style change usually is a flop. But when we think about, okay, what's one little tweak I can make? And then what's another little tweak? That's where we're able to sustain change. For time management, there aren't always easy answers. Everyone's unique, and what works for everyone is different. So getting creative, it's really what's going to help you think about kind of hacking yourself, right? What's going to help you make the change that you're looking to make? And then the last thing I'll just remind you, right, is that time management truly is a life skill. You're not going to arrive and get there, and it's not going to happen overnight. You're kind of always going to be working on it as your roles and responsibilities change. Your time management skills are going to need to change and shift and grow. So when we think of it as something that we're in for the long haul, I think it can help instead of thinking of it as something that we either get or we don't, right? That's a little bit, that just doesn't offer us much. All right, so I want to say thank you to Sadira from the Multicultural Student Services for inviting me to do this workshop, and I hope it was helpful for you. If you want to chat more about any of these things, I'm happy to do that. Here is my email. It's the best way to reach me, and we can meet by phone or by Zoom in these COVID times, but I'd love to connect and help you strategize with what you're looking for. All right, so long.